Chris Cuomo of CNN had a debate the other day with a news anchor for RT, which of course is Russia Today. They're a news agency that's funded by the Kremlin. And they discussed the recent Malaysian plane that was shot down. So the day after that debate, a bunch of CNN hosts are going to get together and essentially mock RT. Let's listen.
What's your role as a journalist? How much do you debate? How much do you own a position? And two is, who's being more effective? For all the talk about propaganda, which by definition is, misinformation, I would say Russia's winning.
Well, there was an amazing story in the New Republic earlier this week talking about some of the conspiracy theories that have taken root in Russia. One was that this plane was filled up with corpses intentionally.
Right,
and then
that's
flown
crazy
and
talk.
crashed.
But there are other ones that have more purchase.
But the idea that these can take root and that we can all hear them, right? 20 years ago, you may have had these theories
would just
in the
be
Soviet
washed,
Union.
right,
We wouldn't. We wouldn't have known about them, but we now live in this globalized media environment where Russia Today has an incredibly popular YouTube channel in the for yes. American audiences, and in many homes, including my home here in New York, I can watch Russia Today on my cable dial. That's a change from a prior generation of media where we weren't exposed to these points of view. Sometimes that can be a good thing. I interviewed Sarah Firth last week. She resigned from RT because she just couldn't take it anymore, and she said,
"That's not what they say."
Well,
right,
no, they say she had a new job lined up and that she was, we haven't heard about what that new job might be yet, so we'll see if that's true. But she said, some of my old colleagues are doing great work there, but they're under the thumb of the foreign policy.
Well, I think it was just so interesting to see the Russian thumb, but the voice was an American voice. Yes. That was the other thing that I think probably a lot of people found a little shocking and jarring to the ear.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I personally like watching some of their YouTube videos, but you got to know what you're watching. Yes. You got to know who's funding it when you're watching Russia Today.
Viewer beware.
Viewer beware. Some of those critiques are totally true. Okay, you should always look at where the funding is coming from for anything, including politicians in the United States of America, which is our biggest beef, by the way, and our biggest issue that we cover endlessly. So that's correct, and people talk about how Al Jazeera, I think they're funded by the government of Qatar, is it? So there are legitimate concerns when talking about these different foreign news agencies. That's not to say that they're all bad, okay? But that's also not to say that they're all good. There are parts of RT that do a fantastic job. Abby Martin's show is pretty good. Tom Hartman, who's a progressive radio show host here, I mean, he does a great show on RT. I know Mike Papantonio every once in a while has a show or fills in on RT. So they're not all bad. It's a mixed picture. And again, it is fair to criticize certain aspects, like where they get their funding and some of the biased coverage that they have. With that being said, does CNN care to critique the flaws in their own network, maybe? Which, by the way, is getting the same ratings as the Pottery Channel or ESPN 17 at this point? No. Because, see, that would require objectivity. That would require using the same kind of scrutiny against yourselves as you're using against the foreign news agencies. Now, all of a sudden, they're concerned about funding, right? Oh, my God, where's RT getting their money from? Is it coming from Putin's pocket? Is it coming from the Kremlin? There's a conflict of interest. There's a conflict of interest. Meanwhile, how often and how many times have you heard on CNN they make that point about all the different Republican and Democratic politicians that they have on their shows? They never say, isn't it weird that you took a tremendous amount of money from ExxonMobil and you voted for a $4 billion subsidy that they get every single year? Isn't it weird that you took money from Walmart and now you're in favor of the giant corporate welfare check that they get? And I could go on and on. Oh, look at that. You took money from the NRA, Mr. Republican X, and you voted against a universal background check bill that 93% of the American people supported. But they never do that. They never talk about funding when it's within their own bubble. If it's outside, then they can be harsh, then they can criticize, then they could really go to work. So, I mean, it's adorable watching a profoundly shitty network act like they're superior to crazy RT. Oh, they're so out there. They suck. Now, let me break it down a little further in terms of the biases that CNN has. Now, we've gone over the biases that RT has and the biases of Al Jazeera and all other different media outlets. We try to be as objective as humanly possible here. So when it comes to CNN, what's their problem? What biases do they have? Well, number one, they have a bias towards sensationalism. And that's actually understandable within the confines of a free market. They need to compete. They need to get eyeballs. So what do? Well, in the middle between one story that's serious about war in Syria and another story that might be about the economy. What do? Kim Kardashian's ass. Kim Kardashian and Kanye. Oh my God, a wedding. Isn't this great? Let's talk about this. Please watch us. This is how we try to get eyeballs. So there's a bias towards sensationalism to get ratings. That's the first bias. The second bias is you have a bias towards neutrality on CNN. See, Fox News, their model is they're the Republican arm of media, and they've cornered that 50% market in the U.S. MSNBC, they are the Democratic arm of media, and they've cornered that market, and they represent the Democratic Party in the U.S. So that's, again, about 50% of the population. Not saying that that's the, the percentage that actually watches, but that's who they're catering to, okay? And then CNN decided, oh, no, we are the high-minded people. We will do neutrality. The only problem with that is, because a lot of people naively think, well, that's a good thing, right? No. Neutrality, it has to be false if you're doing it within the world we live in today. Because the truth is not 50-50. The truth is not, hey, Republicans are right 50% of the time, Democrats are right 50% of the time. Sometimes it's much more black and white than that, and one side is much more correct than another side. And a lot of the times, neither side is right. Okay? So it's a false neutrality bias where they just present what both sides say and they go, okay, you pick, and they don't actually abide by the principle of objectivity. That should be the only bias your news station has, and that's not even really a bias. That's just you doing your job. If you say, all right, we're going to be totally objective and just tell you what's true regardless of where it falls in a partisan way. But they don't do that. They don't abide by objectivity. They abide by neutrality, okay? And then the third and final bias they have is a bias towards the establishment, okay? So, again, that would be Wall Street, that would be the big corporations, and that would be Washington, whoever the powers that be are. Now, why does that bias exist? This is really interesting. This bias exists for access, okay? So you want to be the first person to hear from Marco Rubio when he decides I'm definitely running, and I'll do my announcement with you, Mr. CNN host X. So what are you more inclined to do when you get the story that Marco Rubio doesn't believe in climate change and he says, I don't agree with the scientists, which he actually said one time, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to cover that in the way it should be covered if you're a news agency and just say, look, man, this guy's an idiot. 99.9% of all the double-blind studies, or the peer-reviewed studies, I should say, from the 1990s until 2012, they all say that global warming is happening and it's man-made and we need to do something about it. So he's just a moron. It's like disagreeing with gravity at this point, right? They're not going to cover it in that way. Why? Because then they're not going to get the exclusive. So all the establishment media operations treat the politicians and the people on Wall Street and the corporations and the billionaires with kid gloves, okay? So a bias towards sensationalism, a bias towards neutrality, and a bias towards the establishment. Sorry to say it, it makes CNN just as bad as a network like RT or Al Jazeera. See, the thing is, with those networks, it's a lot easier to explain the bias because it's just, oh, they get funding from the Kremlin. Therefore, they're going to bias it in favor of the Kremlin or Vladimir Putin or the Russian government, right? So it's easy to explain that. So they're covering it. CNN's covering it like, see, they're so biased. We're not biased. No. Just because your biases are different and it takes a little longer to describe them doesn't mean they don't exist. So CNN, spare me with your mockery. You're not much better than they are.